Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I wanted to have a conversation about a topic that I feel many of you can resonate with. It's a topic that I don't think is talked about too broadly, but it's super important. And it's about why high performing women burn out quietly. So let's dive in. I think a lot of high performing women are burning out quietly, and no one realizes it because from the outside, they look like they're still functioning. They're still showing up, they're still helping everyone else, they're still getting things done, but internally, they're exhausted. And I think a lot of us have normalized surviving in a constant state of pressure without realizing how much it's actually costing us. So, what does quiet burnout actually look like? I think most of us would agree that when we think about burnout, we envision someone who looks disheveled or frail. But here's the thing, burnout doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it just looks like functioning or overperforming or someone that's always dependable or constantly on, or maybe you're exhausted, but you're still productive. Or you're mentally drained, but you're still meeting expectations. Or maybe you're overwhelmed, but you're still showing up for everyone else. I'll share what burnout looked like for me. And I know that I've touched on this in previous videos, but for me, the way that burnout showed up was specifically when I worked in corporate environments. I always felt like I had a pressure to perform. I was constantly thinking ahead. I always had to be prepared, and I always felt like there was no room for error. And here's the thing, some women are so good at functioning in survival mode that no one realizes they're struggling, sometimes not even them. So, now let's talk about why high performing women experience this. And this is for some women, especially women who have spent years feeling like they had to prove themselves in certain environments. Maybe you feel like your worth is tied to your productivity. The more you do, the more worthy you are, or the more worthy you'll become. Feeling like rest has to be earned. And when you do rest, you probably feel guilty about it. Or feeling a pressure to be competent, which I touched on this a moment ago for myself, always feeling like I had no room for error, or always being the strong one. Maybe you're the fixer, the helper. Everyone can come to you because they know that you are going to get it done. Or internalizing perfectionism, which is something I've struggled with. And I had to come to the realization that perfection is unattainable. Um, Hyper independence, that's something I struggle with as well. And maybe you do as well, where you don't ask for help, or it's hard for you to accept help from anyone. You got this, you're good. Maybe you're that type of individual where I got this, I'm going to get it done. I'm doing okay. Or maybe you feel a sense of not wanting to disappoint people. And somehow that what other people think of you also ties to your worth, which is not true, by the way. Now let's talk about how quiet burnout shows up. So maybe you are emotionally numb. You have nothing left to give, nothing else to take on, or maybe you just don't care. Irritability, overthinking, brain fog. Maybe you are struggling to come up with words or are forgetful. Maybe you have a difficulty being present. So physically you're there, but mentally you are somewhere else. Um, Feeling disconnected or feeling a constant need for recovery time, or maybe even after you've rested, you still feel exhaustion, or do you feel guilty for slowing down? These are all ways that quiet burnout can show up. So, to sum it up, you're physically present, but mentally and emotionally, you checked out a long time ago. I'll tie these into my own personal lived experiences. So for me, how burnout showed up, specifically me being a woman of color working in corporate spaces, there were certain pressures that came from that for me. Over preparing. I always needed to be 3 steps ahead, or code switching. That was a huge part of it for me, and always having this internal battle of my identity and how that showed up while I was at work. Constantly feeling like I had to prove myself. Again, tying it to the more productive I was, the more worthy I was of being in that space. And for me, feeling like mistakes had heavier consequences. That was something that I internalized as well. And because of that, that led to more overperforming and just really honing in and trying to be really thorough with what I was doing. I had to get to a point where I realized that I'm a human being and everyone makes mistakes. So those are just a few ways that I now realize how burnout has showed up for me in the past, or things that led to me burning out without me realizing it at that time in those moments. Ladies, I want you to know that you are not alone in this. I have experienced most, if not all of those things, which led to me quietly burning out. And I did get to a realization, or so a shift did happen for me. And I touched on this in previous videos as well when I talked about my personal story. Um, I got to a point where I had to, or where I realized that survival mode is not sustainable. Um, Essentially, you're just walking around in zombie mode, and it's not sustainable. I came to realize that my body was keeping score. So all of the things that my body was telling me, I was ignoring, but they were still there and they were still real. I had to understand that constantly proving myself was exhausting, very, very exhausting. And I also had to come to the realization that I didn't need to earn rest, and that um, I also realized that productivity is not tied to my identity. And that was a big one for me because, again, um, I always had this sense of needing to be perfect and needing to be on top of things and being ahead of the game. And so that shift for me and that realization for me was a big one, because I needed to separate that what I did or how I performed was not, is not who I am. And so that was a big shift for me. Basically, I came to realize that I had built a life around performance, but not necessarily around peace. Hey everyone, thank you so much for being here. If you enjoy this type of content and want to explore more topics like this with me each week, I invite you to join the collective by clicking on the subscribe button below. And don't forget to turn on your notification button so you receive notifications every time I upload a new conversation each week. Thank you so much for your support. Now I'll share what recovery looks like for me now. It's being intentional about slowing down and protecting my energy. That's a huge one for me. So I've learned that I don't always need to be available, and that it's okay to defer that phone call if it means protecting my solitude or time for myself. I've become more self aware. I'm checking in with myself more honestly. I am trying to rest without guilt. I'll be honest, that's one that I'm still struggling with. It's still a work in progress, but I'm working through it. And choosing presence over performance is another thing that has been a huge realization for me, and something that I'm really working to achieve every day. And I think most importantly, it's been redefining what success looks like for me internally. So, as I said a moment ago, resting without guilt. Still working on that, but it's something I'm still working through. Putting myself first, being honest about how I feel and being okay with honoring those feelings. So, for example, if there's an event or a function that I don't want to go to, I am now in a space where I'm honest about that and I give myself permission to be honest with how I feel. And I try to make sure that I do that without explanation. Um, so that's been the big one for me is redefining what success looks like for me internally. One thing that's been really important for me in this season is creating small moments that help me slow down, stay grounded, and reconnect with myself. Journaling has been a huge part of that for me, along with some of the simple tools that I use every day. So, if you're someone who's also trying to create more intentional, calm, and grounded moments in your everyday life, I will link a few of the things that I use below. If I have one final thought about this topic, it would be that for you ladies to know that you don't have to fall apart publicly for exhaustion to be real. And I'm gonna repeat that because I think it's super important. So, ladies, I want you to know that you do not have to fall apart publicly for your exhaustion to be real. And one more thing before I go, I want to leave you with a gentle reminder that up until this point, your success rate is 100%. You are still here, you are still standing. So please keep going, hang in there. Everything is going to be okay. And I will see you guys on the next one. Bye.